Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the HSCG Master Maker podcast. I am here with a very old friend of mine who everybody knows, Marie Gale. And why do we all know Marie Gale? Because she is the compliance guru of the industry. Marie is the type of person who loves to pore over all of the rules and regulations, good manufacturing practices, the FDA website. She loves that, and she interprets it into something that you can understand and digest better. Because we all know how those websites are in real life, don't we, Marie?
Yes, we do. And they change.
That's right, quite a bit. So, welcome, Marie Gale, to the Master Maker podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So, we're going to get right into this topic. And our topic today is about compliance, but why compliance is good business. Okay. We want to prove that point to everybody because when you say the word compliance, a lot of times people start going,
Oh, exactly. I've run into that for years.
So we're going to make it fun. We're going to remind them why, yes, you may not love compliance, but your business will. So what is one thing you wish every small soap and cosmetic maker truly understood about why this actually matters for their business?
I guess there's two sides to it. One side is that for your own business, it means that you have the peace of mind knowing that there's not a lot of likelihood that the FDA is going to come knocking on your door. There is a possibility that if you were at a craft show, an inspector might come walking down the aisle. But generally, the thing about compliance is that when you have it when you know that you're compliant, then you don't have that niggling thought in the back of your mind. It's sort of like when you're in a school zone, let's say, and you know the school zone is 15 miles an hour. When you go 15 miles an hour, you're like, okay, I can go through this. But when you're going 20 miles an hour, you're always looking over your shoulder. And it's kind of like that. You don't want to be looking over your shoulder all the time. The other side of compliance is that what you do does make a difference in the industry. So if there's a whole bunch of people that are doing things that are non-compliant and are making unsafe products or not disclosing what they're doing or not making their labels correct, that's when the FDA and the legislators start going, maybe we need to do something more about that. And we don't want that. We do not want that. 10 years tells us we both do not ever want that anymore. So we want to stay away from things that will bring attention to the industry because of non-compliance. So every person that has their compliance in order puts it on the positive side. And every person that says, oh, I don't really care, I don't give a crap, it's not going to make a difference, it does. It does make a difference.
I can speak directly to that. Yes. After 14 years of walking the halls in DC, 6 to 7 trips a year to DC to say the same things over and over about the industry, it does make it harder for those of us advocating for the industry when there's people out there not complying with the regulations.
Right.
Absolutely, it does. And I would add a third thing to that too. Compliance also is good business because it makes better products. It makes your business better. If you're following all the rules, there's sort of a synergy that is created, and the products that you're going to put out are going to be better. I would say definitely.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of compliance has to do with keeping records and knowing what you're doing, knowing your products are safe by having safety substantiation. You might know that your soap is safe, but you actually have the substantiation for it. And when you have all those underlying pieces, they make it better, exactly like you said.
It just reminded me of something when you started to say that and about your point about how compliance gives you peace of mind. We all remember when we were all in school, and if you did the homework assignment, you just rushed to class, you sat in the front, you were ready to go when they said, turn in your homework, there's your homework. But what about those days that you either didn't do your homework or you didn't do it well? You dreaded it. You dreaded the whole thing. You sit in the back, you put your head down because you think if you don't make eye contact, nobody's going to notice, right? So it's that same thing. It's that feeling. You want that peace of mind.
Yeah, and that leads into another thing, and that is that if you know you're compliant, like you said, you're going to be more willing to sit in the front of the class, which means in a business context, that means you're going to be more willing to reach. You're going to be more willing to take on bigger clients or look for bigger clients. If you're unsure about whether or not your label is right, are you actually going to try to sell your stuff on Amazon, or are you going to try to get a contract with Whole Foods if you have that uncertainty? Probably not.
Right.
But if you know, then you have that peace of mind. So that big company comes to you, you get that big break. It's like, yes, it's not crap. Now what do I do? They're two very different feelings. And if
Absolutely.
you want your business to go, you don't want to have those, oh, crap feelings at all.
Right, right. Let me ask you a follow-up question. So let's say you have somebody out there who isn't compliant and they're just not taking the time and their labels aren't correct or something else is amiss, but they also have general and product liability insurance and they get a lawsuit against them. Does not following the rules and regulations do anything to negate possibly their policy?
I can say this based on my personal conversations, and this is all my legal disclaimers are now in place. I'm not an attorney, I'm not an insurance person. But if you look at the policy carefully, it probably says you're not protected when you've done something illegal.
Correct.
That's in most insurance policies. Now, where an insurance company is going to cut it off as far as what they consider illegal is probably a judgment call. And I would expect that in most cases, they would probably not make an issue out of it.
Right.
But that potentiality is there.
Right.
If you probably would be more at risk if you had a cosmetic product that has a mandatory warning label that's supposed to be on it and you didn't do that and that became the issue, as opposed to you didn't say rinse if you get in your eyes. So where it's an absolute non-compliance with something that's pertinent to the lawsuit,
Right.
you are at risk.
Right. So just do the right thing so that all of these things fall in line. You're making your product safely, it's safe for the consumer, it's safe, keeps your insurance policy in check, all of it. So
Yeah.
so let's talk about MOCRA. So MOCRA, for those of the listeners who do not know what that means, it's the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulations Act. And it
Right.
was passed in 2022 and it's been rolling out ever since. There actually, for those of you listening, there's an entire section on the HSCG website. If you're, not sure about what MOCRA means, you can go there. And there's a whole section of Marie Gale's content that you can use. But let me ask you about it. Okay. In
Okay.
plain English, what changed from what was before? Like the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was the law of the land before MOCRA took over. So, and why should a maker selling at a farmer's market or on Etsy care about MOCRA?
Well, there are a few different things about MOCRA. A small maker who's not making over $1 million and not making products that are high risk, like things that go in your eye or around your eye or injected or ingested products. Part of the regulations won't even apply to those small business makers. So you don't have to register your product, you don't have to register your facility, and you don't have to follow the good manufacturing practices when they're finally released, we don't know when that's going to be.
And that's where the HSCG came directly into play. I just wanted to point that out. That's what the HSCG did for the industry. We worked hard to get small business provisions, and that's what they were, so that the startup companies and the smaller companies would not have to comply with the same regulations that the large companies comply with.
Right. And that's a huge factor. The facility registration and the product registration you can do if you want to anyway. And in some cases, it could be a benefit. The parts of MOCRA that do apply, and I think they're a good idea. One of them is that you have to have an adverse event contact on your label. And most people already do. It's either your street address and your city state zip, which is your business address. It's already required. If you have your street address, that meets that requirement, so you're good. Or you need to have a website or an email, and most people do anyway. So that's a new requirement, but it's kind of something people are already doing. Another requirement, which makes sense, actually, is that if there's a serious adverse event, you have to report it. You didn't used to have to report it. Now you do have to report it, but a serious adverse event is not something that a small maker is likely to see. God, I hope not. Serious means, an infection that requires medical treatment. It's death. It's a permanent disability. It's something that's scarring. It's a serious.
Right.
Minor itching, redness, that doesn't count. So that's a good thing. That it doesn't really affect small makers, but it's a good thing overall. The other requirement that comes into play that a lot of makers don't really realize is that you need to have safety substantiation. And this was an expansion of common sense. You should know that what you're making is safe, but now you're required to have the documentation that shows that it's safe. And for everything that small makers do, it's pretty easy because that documentation does exist. You're not using things that aren't safe mostly.
Your suppliers can provide that documentation in many cases for ingredients, correct?
You'd think so.
Okay.
You would think that the suppliers would do that. But what I have seen is no, they don't. Suppliers typically provide like a safety data sheet, which isn't what's being talked about here. What's being talked about are the actual studies that show that the ingredient is safe when applied to the human body. So there are already a lot of things in place. Like if you use color additives that are already approved by the FDA, well, then they've been approved because they're safe and you already have that documentation. The Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel has reviewed most of the ingredients that are used in cosmetics. There's one document that lists basically all of the oils that we would use in their basic form, their saponified form, their hydrogenated form, and they're all safe to use, even at high levels. So it's just a matter of having that documentation, and understanding MOCRA sort of puts you in that mindset that you have what you need. So if anybody comes to you and goes, is your product safe? You can say, well, absolutely, I know it's safe because here are all the studies that show that. It's not that hard to put it together. It just takes some time.
Right, right. And you do have a guide out for following MOCRA, correct? And you also
Yeah.
have a new edition of your labeling book out, correct?
Yeah, that's true. And on the website, the Soap Guild website, there's a couple of forms that you can use for filling out, collecting your safety substantiation information. So that's all there. The other thing that MOCRA has that's coming is they're supposed to do fragrance allergens. The FDA is supposed to put together fragrance allergens that we're supposed to identify at some point in the future. The last thing that I saw was that they were going to come out with it in May. It's already like 3 years late. So
Okay.
I don't know. It didn't come out in May. We'll see when they finally do that and what it says. It's unlikely to be as heavy as what Europe has because the FDA doesn't do that. But we'll see what it says and what it's going to mean for small makers.
And Marie works with HSCG and keeps that up to date on the website for us. So anytime that you want to know what's going on with MOCRA, you can come to the HSCG website and it will be up to date as far as what is required.
Right.
So, what is the biggest compliance myth you hear from small makers? The one that makes you sort of want to flip the table?
Well, the biggest one is they're doing it. Why can't I?
They're doing something wrong or not.
Yeah, which follows right along. Well, how did you decide what you were going to put on your label? I looked at what other people were doing, right? That's where I figured out what I was going to put on my label. And honestly, it's terrible to say, but if you go to a lot of the sites where they have, Amazon even, a lot of the labeling is wrong. It's not correct. And, I see the FDA going after bits and pieces of it, nothing really major, but.
Because labeling is a very particular thing. You have to have certain information. You have to have it in certain places. You have to have it in certain sizes, correct?
Yeah, it's very straightforward. Yeah. It's not that hard to get your labeling right. The place where people tend to fall off the cliff is when they start trying to use their product to cure things, cure all kinds of different things. Well, so-and-so said that their product cured this or did that, or so why can't I? And you can't because you can't make an unapproved new drug, and they are, and they're likely to get themselves into trouble sooner or later.
Right.
But that's one of the things that really kind of gets me. The other thing that's hard for a lot of small makers has to do with the business name and address. You're supposed to put your business name and address on your label, and people who work from home, that's an issue.
Right.
It can be a problem. You don't want to do it. The FTC has upgraded their information like 10 years ago so that you could use an online resource, but you still have to expose your address.
somewhere.
So
Yeah.
I started looking at it and I finally realized, if you're making soap at a farmer's market or you have a small business, unless you're selling broadly wholesale, you have so much less exposure if you just put your name and address on the label, because at least that way only customers are going to get it,
Right.
right? Only somebody who's got your product is going to have your name and address, as opposed to not putting it on the label and then having to have it somewhere online where, the world and God and everybody can see it.
Yes.
So it's an interesting exposure issue. I understand it's a real hard thing. And by the way, have you ever heard anything back on that petition that was filed?
No,
No?
so for the listeners who don't know what
Oh,
we're referring to, the HSC actually, with Marie wrote this for us, was a citizens petition. And what it is you can write this to an institution or agency in the government to ask for a regulation change. And we did this, I don't even remember it was over a decade ago, to
oh
ask.
yeah, it was like 2000, it might have been 2018, 2017,
Yeah.
something like that.
So
Yeah.
what we did was ask them if they could look at the rule that we were just speaking of and make it possible that a PO box could suffice instead of a street address, right?
Well, actually, I hate to correct you on that.
Oh, and see, my memory might not be good. It was so long ago. So go ahead, correct.
That when they responded to and said, we did get an answer back to that, and they said, no,
Right,
absolutely not,
right. And that,
right?
okay,
Yes, but the regulation says a city or phone directory,
correct,
right?
correct.
Well, I mean, we haven't had city directories for 40 years, and we haven't had phone directories for 20 years. So, but they said it could be an online phone directory. So
Right.
that was what, 2012. So almost 15 years ago. Well, since then, online phone directories, like they don't even exist
No,
really. And they're just advertisements. So the petition, the most recent petition, which was like I said,
I
2000,
remember now.
yeah, was to update it so that it followed the FTC's regulations. It said it could
Correct.
be readily accessible, publicly available online resource,
There you go.
which means basically you could find it in a search engine.
Right, right.
You could get to it and find
No,
it.
we have not heard back on that second petition.
I mean, I'm telling people go ahead and do it because, they probably aren't going to push the point. But
Right, right, right. So sometimes makers think compliance is just about avoiding getting into trouble, which we have been talking about that. It does
yeah,
give you peace of mind, and it does make you avoid getting in trouble. But what is the flip side of this, and how does being compliant help your business grow?
I think more than anything else, it comes back to what we were talking about before. It's the certainty and the ability to know that you can reach into bigger, wider markets, places where there's online scrutiny. You would be more likely to want to get your product mentioned on a TV show or picked up by a magazine if you know that that amount of scrutiny of your product isn't going to wind you up in some kind of trouble.
Yeah, very good, definitely. And there are some brands that require it too that I've heard in the past. Like some of the bigger stores and brands, they require insurance and they require that your labels and everything are compliant before they'll even sell your product.
Yeah, that's true. One of the ways that the FDA has gotten around going after individual people is that they go after the platforms. So they've sent warning letters to Walmart and Amazon and a couple of others that are places that sell, and they've warned them about putting adulterated or misbranded products into interstate commerce because they're the ones that ship it.
Right, right,
Right. So they've become a lot more aware and there's a lot more scrutiny.
right,
So there's that.
right. So for someone who's hearing all this and they're very panicked, which is understandable, where do they start? If you could give them just 3 starter steps, what would they be?
The 3 starter steps would be make sure that you're not claiming that your product can cure or treat anything, your product or your ingredients. Put your name and address on the label. Put your net contents on the label, how much is in there. A lot of people miss that. It's very important, it has to go on the front. And put your ingredient declaration on the label. And that pretty much covers your basic requirements. If you have that, You're basically set as far as your label goes.
And that's not too hard to comply with either. And again, Marie has a fabulous book that lays this all out for you. So make sure you check it out. Most people in the industry, when they start thinking about updating their labels or making their labels compliant, yours is the name that we hear. So
Yeah, and that's kind of been true for a while now. The other thing, I do answer questions for Soap Guild members. So if you are a Soap Guild member, you can always email me. And I have a website that covers a lot of this stuff. The information is out there. Just make sure that when you're getting the information, you're getting it from a reliable source. So
not
I
based
like to think that I'm a reliable source, but the HSCG is a reliable source. There's a lot of good information there. There's good information on my website. If you can manage the FDA website, good on you, and that's a place. But don't go to your peers for labeling advice, because I constantly see that people give bad advice.
Yeah, I have to say that's my flip the table one. So get infuriated when I go on and I see people ask a question about compliance and all of the bad information that they get. And then they just go off like, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
And then there's a lot of people who say, well, somebody will say, yes, this is the regulation, and they may be right, and then somebody else will say, yeah, but I don't do it that way, and I haven't gotten into any trouble. This is how I do it. And so it gets off in this whole long discussion, and that's really not the point.
That's right. Go back to the homework reference.
Yes.
Always want to have your homework done so that you feel good in front of the teacher.
That's right. And copying from somebody else's paper
Bad.
doesn't offer.
Right. See, just bring it back to school and we got it.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah.
So, okay, what is the most common labeling mistake that you regularly see?
Most common. Wow. It's a toss up. Okay. I regularly see people who are making claims for their product that make it illegal. That's not really a labeling issue. That's just a plain old illegal issue. It's probably the net contents. People get confused. There are some specific requirements for the net contents, but it even comes down to, I've seen people who say the net weight is so many fluid ounces, right? Fluid ounces aren't by weight.
Right.
So there's confusion. A lot of people have confusion. It comes down to math, it comes down to numbers, it comes down to weighing, and that causes confusion for a lot of people. And then they just omit it sometimes from the front of the label. And of all the things that are likely to get you in the most trouble, I think that's the thing that gives you the most risk. And that's going to be the risk when you have your stuff at a farmer's market. There's your soap and your lotion, and it doesn't have the net contents on it. And you're at a farmer's market where people are selling food. And so the food inspector is going to come by. And in most states, the food inspector is also the cosmetic inspector. But that food inspector isn't trained on cosmetics. He doesn't really know the cosmetic regulations. He does know the food regulations. And the top food regulation is the net contents. How much is it? And it's obvious. And he picks up your product, and that one thing he sees isn't there. So that's going to be the first thing that's going to get any inspector's attention, is the net contents being missing.
And that's not even FDA.
No, it's not. It's going to be your local inspector.
Right.
I mean, there's like 9 FDA inspectors for all the cosmetics in the country. They're not going to be probably walking through your farmer's market, but your state guys are, your local guys are.
Right. Excellent. So for good manufacturing practices, which we refer to as GMP, they sound intimidating. So for a maker working out of their home or their small studio, what does GMP look like, and is it attainable?
Yes, it is attainable. It looks like being a conscientious and diligent cook is what it looks like. You wouldn't cook on dirty dishes. Don't make your cosmetics in dirty containers. You wouldn't cut up your vegetables on a cutting board where you've just cut up raw meat, I hope. So that transfers over. That's the same kind of thing with making cosmetics. If you can make good, clean food and keep your kitchen clean and nobody gets sick, if you apply those same kind of standards to making your products, you're probably going to be okay. There's one added thing to good manufacturing for cosmetics, and that's the record keeping. Because when you're cooking, you're usually cooking one off. You take a recipe, you cook one off, and that's good. But when you're making cosmetics, you're doing the same thing over and over again. So you want to make sure that you have good records of it. So in case something goes wrong, you're going to be able to tell. Your food, you've got your family. If they get sick, you see it right away. But if you're making cosmetics, they're going out to other people. And if they're having negative effects for some reason, then it's a slightly different thing. So if you have good records, that's a key part of good manufacturing practices. It's also a key part of good business, having your records, knowing what you made, knowing what it cost you, knowing when you made it, knowing who it was sold to, knowing where you got your ingredients, knowing who your suppliers are. Keeping those records someplace other than in your mind is
Yes.
basically it.
Yes. And
Yeah.
knowing which formulations worked and which ones don't, which
Mhm.
ingredients work great, which ones don't.
Exactly.
Yeah, all that
And
trial and error, it's hard to keep it in your head.
yes, the biggest kind of things that I see that people do, which are examples of horrible good manufacturing practices, are things like I started making it and then my daughter called and I couldn't remember if I had put the fragrance in or not.
Right.
Or, I came back and I forgot to put the fragrance in, or I didn't add this ingredient. It's so those kind of things, that's what having good manufacturing practices keeps in check. Because if you were doing it right, you'd have a checklist, you'd be able to go down the checklist, and either you would not take the call from your daughter, or if you had to take the call from your daughter when you came back, you'd know exactly where you were.
Right. That's a good point. And
Yeah.
let's remind to the listeners that the GMP portion of MOCRA is still under review.
Yeah, I expect they're probably doing something about it right now, sort of in the background. But what they've said is that it's not even on their list of things to address
Right.
at the moment.
And we, the HSCG, have been asked to chime in on what our opinion is of what small makers can comply with when it comes to GMP. So we will be kind of engaged with that process as it goes forward. If there's anything that comes out that the small makers would have a problem with or would cause an undue burden, we will intervene.
Yes, there's actually one of the things in the law that was passed. Thank you very much, Leigh. Is that it says when the FDA develops the good manufacturing practices in regulation, they must take into account small business.
Yes.
It's actually in there. So even though it's something that won't apply unless you are making over $1 million or you make high risk products, it still will have provisions for small makers
Right.
in there.
And GMP is
Whatever
one
they
of those things too, as well as compliance. GMP is one of those things, if you take care of it, if you're mindful of it, it's going to make your business better. It's going to give you more peace of mind that the products you're putting out are good, they're not adulterated, they're formulated properly, and they're safe to use.
Right, exactly. I do want to point out that there are still a few states that have requirements, GMP requirements for cosmetic makers, even small makers.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind if you happen to be in a state where they've decided to
Right.
keep
That
an
sounds
eye on
like
you.
a good blog post or for Monday.
It's been covered. Yeah, I've
Okay.
covered it a couple of different times, different things. Different states have different, requirements. So
Okay, so let's finish this sentence. If compliance is good business, give us the bumper sticker version. A compliant maker is a blank maker.
confident.
I like it. Mhm.
Yeah.
Confident maker is excellent. So, what excites you most about the handcrafted soap, cosmetic, and candle industry and where it's headed now that MOCRA is the law of the land with adequate protections for small business?
What excites me the most, I think, taking the longer look, which is kind of what I do, I think with the passage of MOCRA, it removed uncertainties. For a long time, we had, I'm going to start this business and maybe there's going to be regulation that's going to wipe me out in the future. So with MOCRA, we don't have that. We have a certainty, a certain path. You know you're safe. Your business is safe. It's not going to be regulated out of existence. You can create it. If it fails, it's on you. It's not because the FDA has done something that makes it impossible for you to be in business. So I think that's the most exciting thing for the industry generally, is that the pendulum is not hanging over your head.
Yeah, that brings up a good point, and I never really thought of it like that before. But the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which was 1938, it did not have anything about not even referencing small business or the industry, the handcrafted industry was not even in the regulation, because back then, obviously, it really didn't exist. So the MOCRA is the first law of the land in cosmetics that actually references small businesses a lot, quite a bit, has the provisions in there. So even if Congress decides in 20 years, 25 years, whatever, that they want to update their regulations, they already know that we exist because it's in the regulations now. That
That's
was our
right.
hugest battle when we were advocating for the industry, is they didn't even know that the industry existed, and certainly not to the level of, 600,000 small businesses in the United States making handcrafted products. So that's a
That's right.
huge win for the future as well. And you're right about that. So that means that we don't have to worry about that they're going to wipe us out with regulation.
Right. And the other part of that is that it filters down to the states.
Mhm.
So there are 2 states already that have modified the regulations that they had in place or are modifying them, because their cosmetic regulations basically were like for all cosmetic manufacturers. And they've modified them to have provisions in there for cottage manufacturers,
Right.
which is what they're called in these particular states. And they parallel sort of the food cottage industry, which is widely recognized now.
Right.
So it's filtering down to the states. They're realizing that they should probably leave us alone as well, which is
Yeah.
really good for those few states that
Right.
have been trying.
Yeah, the internet and the creation of, the web created so much more entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship has exploded since, people can be online, have a website, sell their stuff. And let's just face it, Washington has to catch up.
Yeah.
Whenever they're trying to regulate something, they got to look out there and see what kind of small producers are, because you can small produce in almost anything now. So they have to think about that now. Whenever
And
they,
with 3D printers,
yep,
you can make almost any, physical product as
right,
well.
right.
So it's
Small
it's a huge,
boutique producers are, and they're sought after. People want, I
yeah,
know when I shop, I love to help a small business out. So,
yeah.
yeah.
You've heard the story about how the original meeting of the soap guild, how it happened, and one of those people that went to it said she met some other people who were making soap online. And it
Right.
was in 1997. It was like, it wasn't even a Yahoo group, it was a CompuServe group for
Right.
anybody who's that old. And and they decided they were going to have a meeting. And one of these women told me it was a scary thing. She actually flew to Ohio to meet these people that she had only met online. She was going to meet them in person. And it's so totally different now. I mean, you wouldn't even go meet somebody
Commonplace.
like that.
It's completely, and now this is how probably majority of people find their relationships and their friendships and
Yeah,
all of it
it's,
online.
and at that time it was such a unique thing to
Yeah.
even find somebody like that, find 30 other people who were, in
Okay.
the
Okay.
same.
Now we're dating ourselves. So now we got to get off that topic.
I wasn't a member then. Okay.
Okay, so I have one final question for you, and I
Yeah.
think we covered this a little bit when we've been talking, but just to make sure that the listeners understand, where can listeners find you if they want to dive more into the topic of compliance, labeling, good manufacturing practices?
Well, the easiest place to find me is on my website, which is mariegale.com, which
That's
is
pretty
pretty
easy.
easy. Pretty easy, yeah. That's probably the easiest place to find me. My blog has got 250 articles about all different aspects of soap and cosmetic labeling and regulations. And now I've expanded it but a little bit past just what the FDA said, because now we have the FTC and we have marketing regulations and we have lawsuits, which is kind of the other side of enforcement. So I cover all those kind of things. I have in the Soap Guild has a great reference library, and I have a lot of articles there. My books are available on Amazon. You can search Marie Gale, and there I am. And I'm available by email,
Right, right.
from my website.
Excellent. Yes. You don't have to worry. If your head is swimming a little bit about this topic, and completely can understand, because it's a difficult topic, it seems that way. But there are resources out there for you. And for you specifically as a handcrafted maker, you have the HSCG website. We have an entire section of Marie's Corner. So that's got all these articles and things that she's written for us for regulation. So take a deep breath, dive in, do some reading. You can do it. And yes, follow the advice of the experts and not the people that you ask questions to on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's basically it. It's really pretty simple if you break it down into the simple pieces that need to be done. It's not complicated.
Right.
It's detailed, but it's not that complicated.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward.
Right.
And there's a lot of resources to help you along your way.
And you have a knack for taking that information that's very wordy and legal and making it more palatable and so that people can understand it. That's your go-to. That's what you're doing.
Rules and regs explained in plain English.
Plain English. That's right. So it was great to have you on the podcast, Marie. When did we first meet? What year was that? 2004.
I think that was the 2004 conference.
Right.
Yes.
But we did meet in 2004 in Dallas.
Yes.
So
2005 is when I got you to work.
That's right. Right. So it's a fog after that. I don't remember anything after that. So I'm kidding. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. I would love to have you back on when we do our second season, and maybe we can dive into like a specific topic about
That'd be great.
So,
okay.
thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's been great seeing you and talking to you.